The screams of a terrified infant pierced the air as Emma Kilpatrick clutched her 3-month-old daughter against her chest, standing on the wooden platform in the dusty town square of North Platte, Nebraska. The year was 1872, and her world had crumbled around her faster than the autumn leaves that now swirled at her feet. "Next up, a woman and her bastard child," announced the auctioneer, a portly man with yellowing teeth and breath that reeked of cheap whiskey. "Sold together or separate, don't matter none to me, starting bid at $5. Emma felt her legs tremble beneath her worn cotton dress. Just 2 weeks ago, she had been a respectable widow traveling west with her baby to start a new life. Now, after being robbed of her money and possessions by bandits who had attacked her stagecoach, she found herself being sold to pay off her boarding debt at the local hotel. The crowd of men gathered in the town square eyed her with varying degrees of interest and disdain. Some saw a potential housekeeper, others saw something far worse. Emma pulled her daughter closer, her auburn hair falling across her face as she tried to hide her tears. $5, called a man with a face like weathered leather. $7, countered another, spitting tobacco juice onto the dirt. The bids climbed slowly as Emma's heart raced. She scanned the faces, praying for mercy from someone, anyone. That's when she noticed him at the back of the crowd. Tall and broad-shouldered, wearing a worn leather vest and a Stetson pulled low over his eyes. Unlike the others, he wasn't leering or smirking. He was watching with an intensity that made her breath catch. $15, shouted a burly man with hands the size of dinner plates. "I'll take the woman. Don't need no squalling infant, though," Emma gasped, clutching her daughter tighter. "No, please, we can't be separated," the auctioneer shrugged indifferently. $16 for the woman alone. Do I hear more? $25, came a clear, authoritative voice from the back. The crowd parted as the tall cowboy stepped forward, his spurs jangling with each deliberate step. "I'll take both of them home." The auctioneer's eyebrows shot up. $25 for the pair going once. $30. Countered the burly man, his face reddening. The cowboy met Emma's terrified gaze, something unreadable in his blue eyes. $50, he said calmly, never breaking eye contact with her. A murmur rippled through the crowd. $50 was more than a month's wages for most men. $50 going once, going twice. Sold. The auctioneer's gavel came down with a sharp crack that made Emma flinch. The cowboy approached the platform, removing his hat to reveal dark hair streaked with sun-bleached strands. He offered a hand to help her down from the wooden stage. "Name's Matthew Norton," he said quietly. "My ranch is half a day's ride from here." Emma hesitated, clutching her baby. Was this salvation or something worse? "Emma Kilpatrick," she whispered, "and this is Grace." Matthew nodded solemnly. "I have a wagon ready. We should leave before the sun gets much higher." Emma followed him through the parting crowd, feeling the weight of stares on her back. Her daughter had quieted, tiny fingers clutching at Emma's threadbare shawl. Matthew led them to a wagon hitched to 2 sturdy horses, helping her climb onto the wooden bench seat before taking his place beside her. As they pulled away from North Platte, Emma stared straight ahead, too numb to cry anymore. She had no idea what awaited her at this stranger's ranch, but she knew one thing for certain: she would do whatever necessary to protect her daughter. "I don't expect anything improper from you, Mrs. Kilpatrick," Matthew said suddenly, breaking the silence as the town receded behind them. "I need help around the ranch, that's all. You'll have your own room, and I'll never enter it without your permission." Emma studied his profile, the strong jaw covered with several days' stubble, the straight nose slightly crooked as though it had been broken once. "Why did you do it?" "Buy us, I mean." Matthew kept his eyes on the trail ahead. "No child should be separated from their mother, and no woman should be sold like cattle." He paused. "I know what it's like to be alone in this world." They traveled for hours, the landscape gradually changing from flat prairie to rolling hills dotted with cottonwoods and pines. Grace slept peacefully in Emma's arms, exhausted from her earlier crying. "We're almost there," Matthew said as they crested a hill. Below them stretched a modest but well-kept ranch. A sturdy 2-story house stood beside a large barn and corral where several horses grazed. Fields of hay extended to the east, and a small creek wound its way through the property. It's not much, he added almost apologetically, but it's peaceful here. Emma felt something unfamiliar stir within her, a faint flicker of hope. It looks wonderful, she said softly. As they approached the house, an older woman emerged from the front door, wiping her hands on her apron. Her silver-streaked hair was pulled into a tight bun, and her weathered face broke into a smile when she saw them. "This is Mrs. Beatrice Walsh," Matthew explained. "She comes from town 3 days a week to help with cooking and cleaning. Lord above, you've brought home a woman and a baby, Mrs." Walsh exclaimed, her eyes wide with surprise. Matthew climbed down from the wagon and helped Emma descend. "Mrs. Kilpatrick and her daughter need a place to stay. They'll be living here now." Mrs. Walsh's expression softened as she took in Emma's worn dress and the sleeping infant. "Well, it's about time this house had some more life in it. Come in, dear, you look like you could use a hot meal and a proper rest." The interior of the house was simple but comfortable, with solid wooden furniture and clean floors. A fireplace dominated the main room and a staircase led to the second floor. "I'll show you to your room," Mrs. Walsh said kindly. "It's right across from mine when I stay overnight. Mr. Norton's room is at the other end of the hall." Emma followed the older woman upstairs, still clutching Grace protectively. The bedroom was modest but clean, with a bed covered in a patchwork quilt, a small dresser, and a rocking chair by the window that overlooked the ranch. "Mr. Norton had me prepare this room yesterday, Mrs. Walsh explained, said he might be bringing someone back." Emma's head snapped up in surprise. "He knew about the auction before today," Mrs. Walsh nodded grimly. "Word travels fast in these parts. When he heard the hotel owner was planning to sell you and your little one to cover your debt, he rode straight into town." She patted Emma's shoulder. "Don't you worry, dear. Matthew Norton is a good man, quiet and keeps to himself mostly, but decent through and through." After Mrs. Walsh left, Emma sat in the rocking chair, gazing out at the landscape as she nursed Grace. The enormity of what had happened today washed over her in waves. Her husband James had died of pneumonia 6 months ago, leaving her with a newborn and few options in Boston. She had used almost everything they had to book passage west, hoping to reach her cousin in California, who had written of opportunities for widows with skills like Emma's seamstress training. Now here she was, technically the property of a man she had met just hours ago, with nothing to her name but the clothes on her back and her precious daughter. Tears slipped down her cheeks as she wondered what James would think of her predicament. A soft knock at the door interrupted her thoughts. "Mrs. Kilpatrick," Matthew's deep voice called, "supper will be ready soon if you'd care to join us." Emma wiped her tears and cleared her throat. "Thank you, we'll be down shortly." Downstairs, the kitchen table was set with simple but abundant food: roast chicken, potatoes, bread still warm from the oven, and fresh butter. Matthew stood awkwardly by his chair, waiting for Emma to be seated first. "Mrs. Walsh makes the best biscuits in Nebraska territory," he said as Emma settled Grace in the crook of her arm. The older woman beamed at the compliment. "Flattery will get you an extra helping, Mr. Norton," she chuckled. They ate mostly in silence, with Mrs. Walsh occasionally commenting on local happenings or asking Emma gentle questions about her journey west. Emma answered politely but briefly, still wary and exhausted. "I've prepared a bath for you after supper," Mrs. Walsh said kindly. "And I found some of my daughter's old baby things in the attic. They're a bit worn but clean." Emma felt a rush of gratitude. "Thank you, that's very kind." After the meal, Matthew cleared his throat. "Mrs. Kilpatrick, I want to make something clear. You're not a servant here, nor are you obligated to me in any way." His cheeks colored slightly. "You're free to leave whenever you wish, though I hope you'll consider staying, at least until you have somewhere better to go." Emma met his gaze. "Mr. Norton, you purchased me today. By law, I belong to you." Matthew shook his head firmly. "Not in my eyes. I'll have papers drawn up in town next week, granting you your freedom officially. Until then, know that you are a guest in my home, not property." That night, after bathing in gloriously hot water and changing into a borrowed nightgown, Emma lay in the comfortable bed with Grace sleeping beside her in a makeshift cradle fashioned from a dresser drawer padded with blankets. She stared at the ceiling, trying to make sense of her situation. Matthew Norton was unlike any man she had encountered. He had spent $50 to rescue a stranger and her child, asked nothing in return, and now offered her freedom. Was such kindness real, or was there something he wasn't telling her? Days passed, settling into a quiet routine. Emma helped Mrs. Walsh with household chores when the older woman was there, and managed on her own when she wasn't. Matthew spent most daylight hours working his ranch with his two hired hands, Tom and Ellie, brothers from a neighboring property who came daily to help with the cattle and horses. A week after her arrival, Emma was hanging laundry on the line behind the house when Matthew approached, leading his horse. "Mrs. Kilpatrick, I'm riding into town. Is there anything you need?" Emma hesitated, then gathered her courage. "Actually, Mr. Norton, I wonder if I might accompany you. I'd like to send a letter to my cousin in California, letting her know what's happened." Matthew nodded. "Of course. We'll leave in an hour if that suits you." The ride to North Platte was quiet but not uncomfortable. Emma had noticed that Matthew wasn't one for idle chatter, speaking only when he had something meaningful to say. It was a quality she found refreshing after the constant gossip of Boston society. "People will talk," he said suddenly as the town came into view. "About you living at my ranch." Emma adjusted Grace in her arms. "People always talk, Mr. Norton. I stopped caring what others thought when I buried my husband with a 3-week-old baby in my arms." Matthew's expression softened. "I'm sorry for your loss." "Thank you. James was a good man, a schoolteacher." She paused. "May I ask why you never married, Mr. Norton?" His hands tightened slightly on the reins. "I was engaged once, about 5 years ago. Martha was the daughter of a rancher from Wyoming Territory. We met at a cattle auction." A sad smile touched his lips. "She died of mountain fever before we could marry." "I'm sorry," Emma said softly, understanding the grief that shadowed his features. In town, Matthew first took Emma to the general store, insisting on purchasing fabric, thread, and other necessities she might need. Next, they visited the post office where Emma mailed her letter to her cousin, explaining her circumstances and asking if the offer of help still stood. As they crossed the street toward the bank, where Matthew intended to withdraw money for ranch supplies, Emma noticed the hotel owner who had sold her at auction. The man's face darkened with anger when he saw her. "Norton," he shouted, "that woman still owes me money." Matthew stepped slightly in front of Emma, his posture relaxed but alert. "I paid $50 for her debt, Jenkins. That's more than triple what she owed you." Jenkins spat on the ground. "She's damaged goods anyway. How's she working out for you?" His leer made the implication clear. Emma felt Matthew tense beside her. "Mrs. Kilpatrick is employed as my housekeeper," he said evenly, "and she's under my protection now. I suggest you remember that." Jenkins sneered but backed down under Matthew's steady gaze. As they continued toward the bank, Emma touched Matthew's arm lightly. "Thank you," she said quietly. He nodded, his jaw still tight with anger. No decent man would speak that way about a lady. At the bank, Matthew not only withdrew funds but also met with a lawyer who drew up papers declaring Emma a free woman, no longer bound by the auction sale. When he handed the document to her, Emma's hands trembled. "Why are you doing all this for me?" she whispered. Matthew's eyes held her steadily. "Because it's right." On their way out of town, they stopped at a small cafe for a meal. The owner, a plump woman named Mrs. Perkins, fussed over baby Grace while they ate, cooing and making faces that delighted the infant. "You have a beautiful family, Mr. Norton," Mrs. Perkins said warmly as she refilled their coffee cups. Neither Matthew nor Emma corrected her assumption, both suddenly finding their meals fascinating. The ride back to the ranch was quiet, both lost in their own thoughts. As they approached the house, the setting sun cast everything in a golden glow that made the modest ranch look almost magical. "It's beautiful here," Emma said softly. "You've built something special." Matthew helped her down from the wagon, his hands strong and sure at her waist. "It was my father's dream. He died before he could see it completed." Over the next few weeks, Emma found herself settling into life at the Norton Ranch. With the fabric Matthew had purchased, she sewed new clothes for herself and Grace, as well as mending Matthew's shirts and trousers in the evenings. She enjoyed these quiet times by the fire, with Matthew reading a newspaper or book while she worked with her needle, Grace sleeping peacefully nearby. One evening, as Emma finished darning a sock, she caught Matthew watching her, an unreadable expression on his face. "Is something wrong, Mr. Norton?" she asked. He shook his head slightly. "I was just thinking that the house feels different with you and Grace here, warmer somehow." Emma felt a blush rise to her cheeks. "I'm glad we haven't been a burden." "Far from it," he said softly. I've enjoyed having you here." Their eyes met across the room, and something shifted between them, a recognition of the comfort they'd found in each other's company. Matthew cleared his throat and returned to his book, but the moment lingered in the air like the scent of wood smoke. As autumn deepened into winter, the ranch work changed with the season. Matthew and his men focused on keeping the cattle fed and protected from the harsh Nebraska winters. The first snowfall came in late November, transforming the landscape into a glistening white expanse. Emma woke one morning to find the world outside her window draped in white. Grace, now almost 6 months old, cooed and gurgled in her cradle, reaching for the dancing dust motes in the sunbeam that cut across the room. "Your first snow, little one," Emma whispered, lifting her daughter to the window. "Isn't it beautiful?" Downstairs, she found Matthew pulling on his heavy coat by the door. "The men can't make it through the drifts today," he explained. "I need to check on the cattle alone." Emma frowned. "Is that safe?" "I've done it many times," he assured her. "I should be back by midday." But midday came and went with no sign of Matthew. As the afternoon shadows lengthened, Emma grew increasingly concerned. The temperature was dropping rapidly, and the wind had picked up, driving the snow into blinding swirls. By dusk, Emma was pacing the floor, Grace fussing in her arms as if sensing her mother's distress. When she heard the distant whinny of a horse, she rushed to the window, peering anxiously into the gathering darkness. Matthew appeared like a ghost through the swirling snow, hunched over in the saddle. Even from a distance, Emma could tell something was wrong. She quickly laid Grace in her cradle and threw on her shawl, hurrying out onto the porch. "Matthew," she called, using his given name for the first time. He slid awkwardly from the saddle, landing heavily on his feet. "Emma," he groaned, staggering toward her. She rushed to his side, gasping when she saw the blood staining his coat. "What happened?" Bull got spooked. "Caught me with his horn," he managed through clenched teeth. "Not too deep, but it's bleeding badly." Emma helped him into the house, her arm around his waist. He was heavy against her, his breath coming in sharp gasps. Inside, she eased him into a chair by the fire and carefully removed his coat to reveal a deep gash in his side. "This needs stitching," she said firmly, hiding her alarm. "Can you make it upstairs to your bed?" With Emma's support, Matthew managed to climb the stairs to his bedroom, a simply furnished space dominated by a large 4-poster bed. She helped him lie down, then hurried to gather clean cloths, her sewing kit, and a bottle of whiskey she knew he kept in the kitchen cabinet. "This will hurt," she warned as she cut away his bloodied shirt. The wound was about 4 inches long, deep enough to need stitches but not life-threatening if properly treated. Matthew nodded grimly. "Not the first time I've been stitched up." Emma cleaned the wound with water she'd boiled and cooled, then took a deep breath. "You should drink some of this first," she said, offering him the whiskey. He took a long swallow, then another, his eyes never leaving her face. "You have steady hands," he observed. "I've been sewing since I was a child," she replied, threading a needle. "Though usually on fabric, not flesh." Emma worked methodically, pushing aside her emotions to focus on the task. Matthew lay still, his jaw clenched against the pain, occasionally taking another swig of whiskey. When she finished, she bandaged the wound carefully, her fingers gentle against his skin. "Thank you," he murmured, his voice husky from the whiskey and pain. "You're a remarkable woman, Emma Kilpatrick." The use of her first name sent a warmth through her that had nothing to do with the fire crackling downstairs. "Rest now," she said softly, gathering her supplies. "I'll check on you later." As she turned to leave, he caught her hand. "Emma," he said, his blue eyes intense despite his weakened state, "I'm glad you're here." Emma squeezed his hand gently. "So am I, Matthew, so am I." That night, Emma slept fitfully, rising frequently to check on both Grace and Matthew. The storm had intensified, rattling the windows and sending drafts whistling through the house. Around midnight, she found Matthew feverish, his forehead hot to the touch. "Cold," he muttered, his teeth chattering despite the sweat beading on his brow. Emma added wood to the fireplace in his room and brought extra blankets. She bathed his face with cool water, speaking soothingly as he drifted in and out of consciousness. When his fever rose alarmingly, she remembered her grandmother's remedy and prepared a tea of willow bark from Matthew's kitchen stores. "You need to drink this," she urged, supporting his head as she held the cup to his lips. Through the long night, Emma kept vigil at Matthew's bedside, praying the fever would break. By dawn, exhausted but determined, she continued her ministrations. Grace, sensing something amiss, was unusually fussy, and Emma nursed her while continuing to tend to Matthew. "Your mama's busy, little one," she whispered to the baby. "Mr. Norton needs our help now." As morning light filtered through the curtains, Matthew's fever finally broke. His breathing eased and he fell into a natural sleep. Emma, relieved beyond measure, allowed herself to doze in the chair beside his bed, Grace sleeping against her chest. When she woke, Matthew was watching her, his blue eyes clear and alert. "You stayed," he said simply. Emma smiled tiredly. "Of course I stayed, you were very ill." He reached out, his hand brushing against hers where it rested on the bed. "No one has cared for me like that since my mother died." The vulnerability in his voice touched something deep within Emma. "Well, I couldn't very well let you die when you saved us from that auction block," she said, trying to lighten the moment. A smile tugged at the corner of his mouth. "Is that the only reason?" Their eyes held, and Emma felt her heart quicken. "No," she admitted softly, "that's not the only reason." The snowstorm continued for 3 days, effectively cutting them off from town and visitors. During this time, Matthew recovered steadily under Emma's care. By the 3rd day, he was able to sit up in bed and even venture downstairs for brief periods. They spent evenings by the fire, with Emma reading aloud from one of Matthew's books while Grace played on a blanket at their feet. These quiet hours drew them closer, creating a domesticity neither had expected but both came to cherish. "You read beautifully," Matthew commented one evening as Emma closed a volume of Tennyson's poems. "Your husband was a schoolteacher, you said." Emma nodded, a wistful smile touching her lips. "Yes, James loved literature. He taught me to appreciate poetry." "He sounds like a good man." "He was," Emma agreed. "We were childhood friends before we married." She paused, stroking Grace's soft hair. "He would have been a wonderful father." Matthew watched them both, something tender in his expression. "Grace is fortunate to have you. Some children aren't so lucky." There was something in his voice that made Emma look up sharply. "Were you one of those children?" He stared into the fire, silent for so long that Emma thought he wouldn't answer. "My father was a dreamer," he finally said. "Always chasing the next opportunity, dragging my mother and me across the country. When she died of cholera, he threw himself into building this ranch. And then he passed too," Emma said softly. Matthew nodded. "Broke his neck when a horse threw him. I was 17. His gaze returned to her. "I finished building his dream because I didn't know what else to do." Emma reached across the space between them, taking his hand. "You've done more than that. You've made it your own." His fingers tightened around hers. "Until recently, it never felt like enough." The storm finally broke on the 4th day, leaving behind a transformed landscape of pristine white. Matthew, though still recovering, insisted on checking the cattle with Tom and Ellie, who had managed to reach the ranch that morning. Emma watched from the porch as they rode out, anxiety gnawing at her despite Matthew's assurances that he would be careful. While he was gone, Emma took stock of their supplies. The pantry was well stocked, but certain items were running low. She made a list for the next trip to town, humming softly as she worked. Grace crawled nearby, exploring the kitchen floor with delighted curiosity. "Look at you, exploring already," Emma said proudly, scooping up her daughter when she reached the edge of the rug. "You're growing so fast." A knock at the door startled her. It couldn't be Matthew or his men returning so soon. Cautiously, Emma approached the door, Grace on her hip. "Who is it?" she called. "Telegram for Mrs. Kilpatrick," came the response. Emma opened the door to find a young man on horseback, his coat crusted with snow. "Took me 3 hours to get out here, madam," he said, handing her an envelope. "Station master said it was important." Emma thanked him and offered him coffee, which he gratefully accepted before beginning the journey back to town. Alone again, she opened the telegram with trembling fingers. "Cousin Emma, stop, received your letter, stop, position no longer available, stop. Cannot offer assistance at this time, stop, regret to inform you Uncle Henry. Passed last month, stop, Aunt Martha relocated east, stop, God be with you, stop." The paper fluttered from Emma's fingers to the floor. Her last hope of reaching California and establishing herself independently had vanished. She sank into a chair, suddenly feeling the full weight of her precarious situation. When Matthew returned that afternoon, he found her sitting quietly by the fire, her expression solemn as she mended one of his shirts. "Is everything all right?" he asked, hanging his coat by the door. Emma considered deflecting the question but decided on honesty. "I received a telegram from my cousin in California. The position she had mentioned is gone and she cannot help me." Matthew sat across from her, his expression concerned. "I'm sorry to hear that. I'm not sure what I'll do now," Emma admitted, setting aside her mending. "I have no family left, no money of my own." "Emma," Matthew said gently, "you and Grace have a home here for as long as you want it." She looked up, meeting his steady gaze. "I can't impose on your charity forever." "It's not charity," he said firmly. "This ranch runs better with you here. And—" He hesitated, then continued more softly, "I've grown accustomed to your presence, to both of you." Emma felt warmth spread through her chest at his words. "We've grown accustomed to being here as well." That evening, as Emma prepared supper, she contemplated her changing feelings for Matthew Norton. What had begun as gratitude had evolved into something deeper, something that made her heart race when their hands accidentally touched or when she caught him watching her with that intense blue gaze. As winter settled fully over the Nebraska plains, life at the Norton Ranch developed a comfortable rhythm. Emma took over the household management completely, freeing Matthew to focus on the ranch operations. Mrs. Walsh still visited weekly, but more as a friend than a housekeeper now, often bringing gossip from town and knitted items for baby Grace. Christmas approached, bringing with it a festive spirit that Emma hadn't expected to feel so soon after the upheaval in her life. One morning in mid-December, she woke to the sound of chopping outside her window. Looking out, she saw Matthew felling a small pine tree at the edge of the yard. Later that day, the tree stood in the corner of the main room, its fresh pine scent filling the house. Matthew brought down a box of ornaments from the attic's simple wooden figures and glass balls that had belonged to his mother. "We haven't had a Christmas tree since she died," he explained as Emma examined the delicate decorations. "It never seemed worth the effort just for me." Together they decorated the tree, with Grace watching wide-eyed from her blanket on the floor. When Matthew lifted Emma to place a star at the top, his hands strong at her waist, she felt a flutter in her stomach that had nothing to do with fear. On Christmas Eve, after Grace was asleep, Matthew presented Emma with a small package wrapped in brown paper. "It's not much," he said almost shyly, "but I wanted you to have something." Inside was a beautiful silver locket. Emma gasped as she opened it to find a tiny portrait of Grace that Matthew had commissioned from a traveling photographer who had passed through town. "Matthew, it's beautiful," she whispered, tears springing to her eyes. "I didn't get you anything." He shook his head, taking the locket and gently fastening it around her neck. "You've given me more than you know," he said softly, his fingers lingering at the nape of her neck. "This house was never a home until you and Grace arrived." Emma looked up at him, suddenly aware of how close they were standing. "Matthew," he stepped back as if catching himself. "I should check that everything's secure for the night," he said, his voice slightly rough. "It's supposed to snow again." Emma watched him go, her fingers touching the locket at her throat, her heart pounding with emotions she was finally ready to acknowledge. Winter passed in a blur of snowy days and cozy evenings. Grace celebrated her first birthday in February with a small cake Emma baked using precious sugar saved for the occasion. Matthew presented the baby with a hand-carved wooden horse, which immediately became her favorite possession. As spring approached, the ranch grew busy with new calves and preparations for planting. Emma found herself fully invested in the success of the ranch, studying Matthew's ledgers in the evenings and offering suggestions for improvements to the house and garden. One mild March day, Emma was hanging laundry when she heard riders approaching. Looking up, she saw 3 men she didn't recognize coming up the drive. Matthew was in the north pasture with Tom and Ellie, too far away to hear her if she called. Quickly, Emma grabbed Grace from her blanket on the grass and hurried inside, her heart racing. Through the window, she watched as the men dismounted and approached the house. "Hello, the house," called one, a tall man with a gray-streaked beard. "Anybody home?" Emma hesitated, then stepped onto the porch, keeping Grace close. "Can I help you, gentlemen?" The bearded man removed his hat. "Madam, we're looking for Matthew Norton. He's working in the pasture," Emma replied cautiously. "May I ask who's calling?" "Name's Samuel Blackwood," the man said. "These are my sons, Peter and John. We've come from Colorado about some cattle Norton advertised for sale." Emma relaxed slightly. Matthew had indeed placed advertisements in newspapers as far as Colorado, hoping to expand his business. Mr. Norton should return for the midday meal soon. "You're welcome to wait." She offered them coffee on the porch, maintaining a polite distance while keeping a careful eye on their weapons. The men seemed legitimate, discussing cattle prices and breeding stock in knowledgeable terms, but Emma had learned caution during her months in the West. When Matthew returned an hour later, his face registered surprise and then pleasure at seeing the visitors. "Sam Blackwood, I didn't expect you until next week." The men shook hands warmly, and Emma realized they were already acquainted. Matthew turned to her with a smile. "Emma, Sam and I met at a livestock auction in Denver last year. He has one of the finest herds in Colorado." The afternoon passed pleasantly, with Matthew showing the Blackwoods his cattle and discussing terms for a significant sale. Emma prepared a hearty meal, and by evening, a deal had been struck that would substantially increase the ranch's profits for the year. As the Blackwoods prepared to leave for their hotel in town, promising to return in the morning to finalize the paperwork, Samuel took Emma aside. "Mrs. Norton, your husband is one of the most honest men I've had the pleasure to do business with," he said warmly. Emma hesitated, then decided not to correct his assumption. "Thank you, Mr. Blackwood, we take pride in the ranch." After they departed, Emma found Matthew in the barn, brushing down his horse. "That was quite a sale," she remarked, leaning against the stall door. He nodded, a pleased smile lighting his features. "With this deal, we can afford to expand the north pasture and maybe hire another hand." He paused in his brushing. "I notice you didn't correct Sam when he called you Mrs. Norton." Emma felt heat rise to her cheeks. It seemed simpler not to explain. Matthew set down the brush and moved closer to her. "Emma," he said quietly, "I've been wanting to talk to you about something." Her heart began to race. "Yes, these past months having you and Grace here." He took a deep breath. "I never expected to feel this way again after Martha died, but Emma, I've fallen in love with you both." Emma's breath caught in her throat. "Matthew." He took her hands in his blue eyes earnest. "I know it might seem too soon, or that I'm only offering because of your situation, but that's not it at all. I love your strength, your kindness, the way you've made this place a home." He swallowed hard. "I'm asking if you'd consider becoming my wife, for real, not just in the assumptions of visitors." Tears filled Emma's eyes as joy bloomed in her chest. "I love you too," she whispered. "I think I have for months now." Matthew's face lit with happiness as he drew her into his arms. "Is that a yes?" He murmured against her hair. "Yes," Emma said, laughing through her tears. "Yes, I'll marry you, Matthew Norton." His lips found hers in a gentle first kiss that quickly deepened, expressing all the emotions they'd held back for so long. When they finally parted, both breathless, Matthew rested his forehead against hers. "I promise to be a good father to Grace," he said solemnly, "and to any other children we might have." Emma smiled up at him, her heart overflowing. "She already loves you. I've seen how she watches for you every day." They were married 2 weeks later in the small church in North Platte, with Mrs. Walsh, Tom and Ellie, and a few neighboring ranchers as witnesses. Emma wore a new dress of pale blue calico, with Grace in a matching gown. Matthew, cleaned up and wearing his Sunday best, couldn't take his eyes off them as they spoke their vows. "I never thought I'd find love at an auction block," Emma said that night as they lay together in what was now their shared bedroom. "But you saved more than just our lives that day." Matthew drew her close, his hand gently stroking her hair. "You saved me too, Emma, from loneliness, from a life half lived." He kissed her tenderly. "I thank God every day for bringing you to me, even through such difficult circumstances." Spring blossomed into summer, and the Norton ranch flourished under their joint care. Emma's garden yielded abundant vegetables, and the cattle business expanded with the successful partnership with Samuel Blackwood. Grace grew into a lively toddler, following Matthew adoringly around the ranch and calling him Papa to his evident delight. In late summer, Emma discovered she was expecting their first child together. When she told Matthew the news, his face transformed with a joy so pure it brought tears to her eyes. "Another baby," he whispered in awe, placing his hand gently on her still flat stomach. "Our family is growing. Are you happy?" Emma asked, though she could clearly see the answer in his shining eyes. "Happier than I ever imagined possible," he replied, gathering her in his arms. "When I saw you that day in town, holding Grace so bravely despite your fear, something told me you belonged here with me. I just never dared hope you might come to love me too. I think part of me began to love you the moment you said you'd take us both home," Emma admitted, leaning into his embrace. Their son, James Matthew Norton, was born the following March, a strong, healthy boy with his father's blue eyes and his mother's auburn hair. Grace, now 2 years old, approached her baby brother with solemn curiosity, then declared him nice before returning to the wooden horse that remained her favorite toy. As Emma watched Matthew holding their son by the window, Grace leaning against his leg as he pointed out a deer at the edge of the property, she reflected on the journey that had brought her here. From the depths of despair on that auction platform to this moment of perfect happiness, it seemed almost miraculous. "What are you thinking about?" Matthew asked, noticing her contemplative expression. "About how life can change in an instant," she replied. "One moment I was standing on that platform, terrified for our future, and the next you were there, offering us a home." Matthew crossed the room and sat beside her on the bed, baby James sleeping peacefully in his arms. "I think I started falling in love with you right then, though I didn't recognize it." Emma leaned against his shoulder, content in a way she had never imagined possible after James's death. "Sometimes the worst moments lead us to the best ones," she said softly. In the years that followed, the Norton Ranch became known throughout Nebraska territory for its fine cattle and generous hospitality. Emma and Matthew added 2 more children to their family, twin girls, Sarah and Rebecca, born on the 5th anniversary of the day Matthew had purchased Emma and Grace at auction. 5 years ago today, Matthew mused as he held one tiny daughter while Emma nursed the other. "Did you ever imagine we'd be here like this?" Emma smiled at him over their daughter's head. "Never, but I wouldn't change a single step of the journey that brought us together." Grace, now 7 and the spitting image of her mother, grew into a thoughtful, intelligent girl with a particular talent for working with horses. Matthew taught her to ride almost as soon as she could walk, and by age 10, she was helping with the gentler aspects of ranch work, her little brother James trailing adoringly after her. When Grace was 12, Emma found her sitting alone by the creek that ran through their property, an unusually serious expression on her young face. "What's troubling you, sweetheart?" Emma asked, settling beside her daughter on the grassy bank. Grace plucked a wildflower, twirling it between her fingers. "Sally Jenkins at school said Papa isn't my real father," she said quietly. "She said everyone knows we were bought at auction." Emma took a deep breath, her heart aching. They had always planned to tell Grace the truth when she was old enough to understand, but it seemed the decision had been taken from them by cruel gossip. "Your birth father was a good man named James Kilpatrick," Emma explained gently. "He died before you were born. And yes, Matthew Papa did buy us at an auction, but not in the way Sally made it sound." She explained their history simply but honestly, watching her daughter's expressive face as she absorbed the information. When she finished, Grace was quiet for a long moment. "So Papa saved us?" She finally asked. Emma nodded. "He did, and then he grew to love us both very much." Grace considered this, then looked up with clear eyes. "I think he was my papa all along then, the one I was meant to have." That evening, Grace approached Matthew as he sat by the fire reading the newspaper. Without a word, she climbed onto his lap as she had done as a small child and wrapped her arms around his neck. "I know about the auction," she whispered. "Thank you for saving us and for being my papa." Matthew's eyes met Emma's over their daughter's head, shining with emotion as he held Grace close. "Being your papa is the greatest gift of my life," he told her, his voice rough with feeling. Time passed, as it always does, bringing changes both expected and surprising. The Norton Ranch expanded to become one of the most successful operations in the region. Tom eventually married a schoolteacher from town and built a small house on the northeast corner of the property. Eli remained a bachelor, devoted to the ranch and to his role as honorary uncle to the Norton children, Mrs. Walsh continued to visit regularly until arthritis made the journey too difficult, at which point Matthew and Emma insisted she move into a comfortable room they had built specially for her attached to the main house. She became a beloved grandmother figure to all 4 children, teaching the girls to cook and sew, and entertaining them with stories of the early days in Nebraska territory. On their 20th wedding anniversary, Matthew surprised Emma by taking her to San Francisco, a journey she had once planned but never completed. They spent 2 glorious weeks exploring the city and the surrounding countryside, marveling at the ocean and enjoying the freedom of time alone together. "Do you ever wonder what would have happened if I hadn't been at that auction?" Matthew asked as they stood on a cliff overlooking the Pacific, the wind tugging at Emma's hair. She turned to him, taking in the face she had loved for so many years, still handsome at 50, with silver threading through his dark hair and laugh lines around his eyes that spoke of a life well lived. "I believe we would have found each other somehow," she said with conviction. "Some things are simply meant to be." He drew her into his arms as he had countless times over their years together. "I love you, Emma Norton, more today than yesterday, but not as much as tomorrow. And I love you, my cowboy who took us both home," she whispered against his lips. When they returned to the ranch, they found that Grace, now 27 and recently married to the son of a neighboring rancher, had news of her own. She was expecting their first grandchild. "Life comes full circle," Emma remarked that night as she and Matthew sat on the porch swing, watching the sunset paint the Nebraska sky in brilliant oranges and pinks. From that terrible day at the auction block to this moment, surrounded by family with a grandchild on the way. Matthew squeezed her hand. "I think about that young woman holding her baby so fiercely, determined to protect her at all costs. You were magnificent even then, though you couldn't see it. And I think about the tall cowboy who stepped forward when no one else would," Emma replied softly. "Who said those words that changed our lives forever." They sat in comfortable silence as darkness fell, the first stars appearing in the velvet sky. Around them, the ranch settled for the night, horses nickering softly in the barn, cattle lowing in the distant pastures, their children's voices drifting from the open windows of the house that had become a true home. "I'll take both of you home," Matthew murmured, echoing the words he had spoken so many years ago. "Best decision I ever made." Emma leaned her head against his shoulder, contentment filling her heart. "And the best journey I ever took," she agreed. "From an auction block to exactly where I was always meant to be." In the years that followed, the Norton family continued to grow and thrive. Grace gave birth to a daughter, followed by twin sons 2 years later. James married a doctor's daughter from North Platte and took over the management of the ranch's expanding cattle operation. The twins, Sarah and Rebecca, pursued different paths, Sarah becoming a teacher in town, while Rebecca inherited her father's love of ranching and worked alongside her brother. As Emma and Matthew entered their golden years, they found joy in the simple pleasures of watching their family flourish, of seeing their grandchildren grow, of sitting together on the porch as the seasons changed around their beloved ranch. And when visitors asked how they had met, as they inevitably did, Drawn by the obvious devotion between them, even after decades of marriage, Emma would share their story with quiet pride. The tale of a desperate young mother on an auction block and the compassionate cowboy who had seen her value when others saw only merchandise. "He said he'd take both of us home," she would conclude, her hand finding Matthew's as naturally as breathing. "And he gave us so much more than just a home, he gave us a life filled with love." It was a story that became something of a legend in North Platte, and beyond a testament to the fact that even in the harshest circumstances of the Wild West, true love and human kindness could flourish, changing lives and hearts forever.